I put it here, Gloria. Hi there. Good afternoon. How are you? I'm glad you're here. It's good to have you here. I'm still Swanee Hunt, the director of the Women in Public Policy program. And for those of you who are just arriving to hear Gloria Steinem, and we're glad that you're here, you are coming in on the final of 3 plenaries that are part of Core Connections, Women, Religion, and Public Policy, a symposium co-sponsored by the Women in Public Policy program at the Kennedy School of Government and the Harvard Divinity School. And it's been a delight, Ann Browdy, working with you and Jenny Mansbridge in this project as we've planned it. Before we move forward, I would like to pause for a moment with enormous appreciation to recognize the woman who has made all of this possible. None of you would be in this room today if it weren't for Holly Taylor Sargent. She is the woman who years ago had a vision that the Kennedy School had got to have a change of culture and start including some significant programming that was particularly responsive to women's perspectives. The Associate Dean of the Kennedy School of Government, Holly Taylor Sargent.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me just to say a few words to you. I greet you on behalf of Dean Joseph Nye, who couldn't be with you today, but is a passionate supporter of the work, the kind of work that you have been doing in the last 24 hours and the work that goes on here and now across the university. The occasion of this afternoon's plenary caused me to do a little bit of reflecting, of course, myself. And I came up with, in a sense, 3 words. One was, of course, revolutionary, because I had the chance to stand on the podium with Gloria Steinem, who I often pause to remember that there are many who had the tenacity and the vision and the courage to fight for things that many of us now take for granted, and that I have undying respect for her and for many like her. The second is passion, because I think when I think of religion and women and examples in my own life, some of the purest examples of real belief, of faith, and of putting that into action in a very personal way are, I find, in female role models, my own mother being one that is most important to me, and so many of the things that I treasure and try to remember on a daily basis were very, very real in the way that she lived her life. But the third is real thought about institutions and the harsh reality that, of course, as we look through the annals and centuries of the institutions that have crafted religion and, of course, public policy, as well as education, we find that the women who have the passion to deliver and live it in their own lives have often not been the ones who have shaped the way institutions shape the world and the public arena. And that as we step into another century and a new millennium, if I have one hope, it is that the faces of those institutions and the decisions that are made which affect men and women and children all over the world have greater balance as we go forward. And I think the kind of work of putting these ideas together with people with so many different beliefs, as we have in the last 2 days, is a very positive step toward that. I'll end with just the reflection about another institution, which is part of this reflecting period that I've had, which is, of course, the institution of Harvard, which is one I know very well. And that is to say that if there could be a prototype of an institution that is not particularly open to change, despite the fact that it was here during the American Revolution, not open to revolutionary thought. It would be this one, and one where women at this very distinguished podium have not often been equally represented. When women, certainly on our faculty, women determining the programs, women sitting in audiences such as this, very, very rarely do you see a gathering with the gender balance as we have today. And it has been a matter of revolution and tenacity and support that I believe is now creating a change across the university, which means that for all students, and we hope for the people that are affected by the work that goes on within the walls and without, that we can make a greater contribution. And for that, I want to say that even in the sense of this collaboration, I'm not surprised that Harvard's oldest school, the Divinity School, and Harvard's youngest school, the Kennedy School, are merged in this collaboration because of women. Because it is often those who are perhaps somewhat still at the margin who have the courage to think in a new way with a new model. And I'm so grateful for all of you of making this a success, because I hope it is the kind of thing that we can all try to replicate as we go forward. And so I turn the microphone over to Swanee, who is the revolutionary who stokes the fires daily within these walls, and say thank you again.
What Holly didn't mention is I got more warnings about coming to Harvard than I did about going into Bosnia in the middle of the war, significantly more. But I must say that the presence of you all here, all of you here today, is indication of how much change has happened here in the last couple of years. In the mid-50s, speaking of change, in the mid-50s, there were two little girls who straddled their broomsticks and rode off into the woods across the gravel road from their grandmother's house in Idabel, Oklahoma. And one of them said, "I'll be Dale Evans, and you be Annie Oakley." And at some point, those two little girls rode back out into the sunlight as adult women and decided that they would try to claim their own identities. What a privilege it has been for me to admiringly stand aside and watch my sister Helen LaKelly Hunt, as she has been a significant force in launching the women's funding movement all across this country, as she has started her own private women's fund, the Sister Fund, 7 years ago, funding social, political, economic, and spiritual empowerment. As she has been working, preparing her manuscript at Union Theological Seminary on the religious roots of American feminism. Helen took a walk with me soon after I came to Harvard, and she said, "I want to do something with you." We decided not to straddle broomsticks, but instead put together the ideas for this conference. And it would not have happened without Helen. In addition to helping with the funding and the planning, she also compiled the compendium that you have received, which was a mammoth work. So with great, great pride, I bring you Helen LaKelly Hunt.
Thanks, Swanee. And it is my honor to introduce Gloria Steinem. This symposium marks an auspicious time for women. It's as if it's a moment of integration. Together, we collectively are recognizing and examining the nexus between women, religion, and public policy. As Swanee and Anne wove together the ideas and agendas that shaped this conference, they got some calls from different institutions around the country reacting to the idea as though it was a brand new concept. And yet it's quite old. Yesterday, both Anne and Marian, and today Kathleen, pointed out that there are many historical figures such as Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila, Sojourner Truth, Lucretia Mott, Fannie Lou Hamer, whose lives exemplify this nexus. The historical figure who comes to my mind is Joan of Arc. As a young girl, Joan followed her own instincts, trusted her own religious experience, which propelled her into donning a suit of armor, hopping on a steed, and galvanizing the French army to protect her country. A woman of the 15th century, Joan's religious faith propelled her into the political arena to protect the freedom and integrity of France. Now, jumping ahead on our historical timeline, when I think about the heroic equivalent today, it is Gloria Steinem, who comes to mind as a modern-day avenger of social justice. A 20th century woman, Gloria brandishes a finely honed sword of intelligence and holds up the crest of women's rights to control her own body and her own life. Just as Joan of Arc fought ceaselessly for the freedom and rights of France, Gloria has spent her life dedicated to freedom, to the freedom and rights of all women. Gloria's political work has propelled her into exploring, as well as challenging, the connection between politics, feminism, and spirituality. She struggles with this issue, I believe. And there are problems with this nexus. I was interested in Letty's question to Marian Wright Edelman yesterday, which was so subtly put. You would have been so proud of Letty once again, because she has that way of so softly but potently asking the question that galvanizes the issue. And to me, her question implied this problem. What happens when leaders of opposing political views both invoke God's singular blessing? Now, there are plenty of problems with the concept of women, religion, and public policy that Gloria helps us articulate. But there are significant resources for healing and a broad vision in this nexus that is a part of our conversation as well. So back to an introduction of Gloria. How do you introduce someone that everyone already knows? I wasn't quite sure. So I thought I'd invite us all down memory lane and offer a few mental snapshots. Now, remember her not with a military helmet like Joan of Arc, but with those fantastic aviator glasses that she wore in the 60s that were yellow and blue. And weren't those cool? And as the second wave of feminism began to emerge in the 60s, there was Gloria looking at it through a new lens, leading women, rallying forces against social structures that had kept us as women suppressed. Remember her in those early years when she caught everyone's attention by her Playboy expose. She was a true lion in bunny's clothing. She has a long-standing legacy of fine journalism on topics that cover the spectrum of social justice issues. And like Joan of Arc, who led a grassroots revolution to claim a country, Gloria advocates individuals from the grassroots to band together in the creation of change. She's a strong proponent of getting people out to vote, insisting that working on the community level is the only real way to ensure a lasting impact. It is Gloria's unflinching ability to speak the truth that woke people up, galvanizing them into action. As a result of her tireless efforts, women now have the right to make their own choices about their lives, much more so than before. This increasing ability of women to shape the social and political spheres, a sphere in which Swanee has become a world leader, has led to a level of empowerment that allows new ideas to be birthed. For as we experience the positive manifestation of our combined socio-political impact, this new conversation, one exploring how can we invest ourselves spiritually into this work, is now before us. How do we include the spirituality and religion of our upbringing, of our cultural traditions, into our public policy work? The interest in this dialogue is helping with the much-needed healing of the rift between women that work in secular organizations and those that work in religious institutions. In the 1990s, we now have a reborn Ms. Magazine, free of the pressures of advertising. Just as Joan of Arc carried the banner celebrating freedom of France into battle, Ms. Magazine offers a monthly cry that unites women everywhere. And across the top of a recent magazine cover were the 6 words describing the topics in that issue. One of the words was faith. Faith and feminism coexisting. It makes sense. Just as religion is about a revolution in consciousness, the women's movement is about a revolution in consciousness. This faith is palpable in the room today, and I feel strongly that it is this emergent impulse, that of bridging the chasm between secular and religious activism, that has given the women's movement a future far beyond what any of us individually could have imagined. For it is the soul and the spirit that offers endless wellspring from which we can deepen our activistic power. And this gathering is a step in bridging this chasm. In the 1400s, Joan of Arc gave all that she had to her cause. In the society of the day, unfortunately, they were unable to appreciate fully her vision, and Joan was burned at the stake after being branded a heretic. Hard to imagine. In the 1990s, Gloria has also been called a heretic, and much worse, by those who feel threatened by her vision. Our advice to Gloria is to stay away from any marshmallow or weenie roast to which you are invited by the likes of Rush Limbaugh or anyone like that. Joan of Arc's task wasn't an easy one. Her achievements were of a scale that only can be supported by one's soul. She was willing to sacrifice her life for the truth that her faith inspired. Gloria is cut from the same cloth, yet she takes visionary work to a new stage, offering that the challenge is to live the revolution, not die for one. What Gloria advocates is a change of global consciousness that will enable all people to live in a world where justice is upheld as primary. Her involvement this weekend brings the journey that we all began full circle, enabling all of us to heal not only the rifts within society, but within ourselves. Please join me in welcoming with honor a woman who combines grace and guts, the lion in bunny's clothing, the amazing Gloria Steinem.
I'm already kind of intimidated by Harvard. Now I have Joan of Arc. But Helen, wait till I tell you the revisionist theory of Joan of Arc. Okay, we can do that in the question and answer time. Looking at Holly, though, reminded me that Harvard clearly has changed because we have been working together on the endowment for John Kenneth Galbraith here. And in that regard, I met her at the Harvard Club. Now, my career in New York at the Harvard Club started demonstrating outside it because women could not come in the main entrance. They could only go in the side entrance and not play in the squash courts, and I've forgotten a whole raft of things. So I met Holly there, and she was carrying a kind of makeup case like this, I thought. And so we walked in, and the cloakroom person walked out to politely take her case. And she said, no, that's my breast pump. I'm going to keep that with me. I thought, things have changed, okay? Right out there. Have you been having a great time at this conference, or what? I'm glad to hear that some people have not been here for the whole conference. because it makes me feel less insecure, because I have not been here for the whole conference. But I really want to thank everyone who has created it. I plan to listen to every recorded word, and I especially want to thank Helen and Swanee. My life has been brightened and enlightened by their presence for a dozen years, I think. And now they've achieved a conference in which the so-called soft subject of women and religion is linked with the so-called hard one of public policy, and at Harvard. I mean, we're talking major history making here. And whether we feel, as we come here today, that we are to the left of Harvard or to the right of it, I think we can agree that this is a terrific accomplishment. I don't know about you, but when I told people that I was coming to this conference and told them the name of it, I got a lot of, "You're kidding." To take the women part first, it's hardly a secret, thanks to courageous alums here, that when it comes to tenured women of any race, Harvard ranks at the very bottom of the nation. And that's despite the great women at the Divinity School here and the School of Education and elsewhere. Overall, in the last 24 years, I just thought I'd remind us, I mean, what am I here for if not making trouble, that, that Harvard has hired an average of 1 woman for every 250 positions filled. In the nation as a whole, the number of tenured males is a problem too. It's increasing 30% faster overall nationwide than that of tenured females of all races. So, as we all know, there are a lot of unemployed and underemployed PhDs, female PhDs out there. And I'm afraid that the flap over affirmative action has obscured the real truth, which is negative action. Second, this is, I'm sorry to say, a materialist, consumerist culture in which we all live, and it still rewards the intellectual over the spiritual, the measurable over the immeasurable, competition over cooperation. And even in that context, Harvard is a symbol of intellect measurement and the fierce competitor. I told a woman named Martha Beck, who some of you may know here, her current book, Expecting Adam, is about her experience and that of her husband here at Harvard as driven, super intellectual grad students. When their lives were changed by non-intellectual, non-driven, and even, dare I say it, spiritual experiences, they found they were out of place here. If any of you are experiencing similar tensions, it's a book that I recommend for company. Martha was greatly heartened by this conference's title, and she said there must have been a sea change at Harvard. And I said, I think there was a lot of fundraising by devoted women at Harvard. As there was by Skip Gates when he rescued the Afro-American Studies program from its office previously above a store. And perhaps this conference is the beginning of a sea change. If there were an Olympic team for optimism, you can see that I would be on it. Still, when 2 distinguished Gandhians came to speak, for example, they were hosted by the Divinity School, not by the Kennedy School, though Gandhi clearly made a revolution. Now, religion tends to be studied as an influence on public policy when it delivers votes, but not how the nature of religious belief contributes to the possibility of democracy or to the lack of it. My only regret about this conference is that I've been deprived of most of it, because I was at another conference. And I hope that during what is usually called a question and answer period, you will indulge me as a deprived golden oldie and maybe indulge our internet audience too by prefacing whatever else it is that you want to say with the most mind-blowing, helpful, or otherwise memorable thing that you have learned or come to understand during this conference. Even those of you who were here probably had to make a lot of choices, and perhaps we can share some of those very precious moments of insight. I've been asked to speak about my own experience of these overlapping realms, 3 realms, and so I've been thinking about it. And it's an exercise I recommend to everybody in this space or in cyberspace, for it made me realize the diversity within my own life and family, And in a way, so many strands of what is here now were represented there. My parents' marriage was the mixed marriage of its day because my father was Jewish, my mother Christian. Neither family approved, needless to say. I had one grandmother, upper-class grandmother, who created social policy out of her Reform Jewish belief in progress, social justice, and service to the community. She founded one of the first vocational high schools and would use only paste vanilla rather than even touch alcohol. As I later learned, thanks to a feminist historian, she was also a suffragist who herself addressed Congress. My family hadn't told me that. Sometimes they don't tell you about the troublemakers, you know, even though they're your own relatives. And the first woman in Ohio ever to be elected to a school board. Clearly, her faith was very much part of her activism and her creation of social policy. On the other hand, my Protestant working class grandmother went to what was called a Scotch Presbyterian church, and it was so strict that dancing and drinking were forbidden, and even music, and even singing. I know of no social policy that she influenced, but she did gamble, she did drink a little, she did dance, and she made pin money by writing sermons for her minister, though he must have known she didn't believe a word. By the time I came along, I want you to know I'm not neglecting my grandfathers here, it's just that they both died before I was born. Those two very different women had not only made peace with each other, as I understand so many of you have begun to do in wonderful ways at this conference, but they had both become theosophists. Theosophy being a gentle Hindu-influenced, very ethical belief that includes reincarnation and God as more or less the spirit of the universe, and incidentally had a disproportionate number of women leaders, not to say inventors. Its child-rearing philosophy helped my mother change the rather cruel methods handed down by her own mother. Theosophy taught that children came into the world through you, but were not owned by you. Thus, a parent has the duty and pleasure of loving a child and helping her or him to find out what is already inside. She achieved a policy change that wasn't public, but it saved my sister and me. On the other hand, my father, who was embarrassed by religion of every kind and never discussed it at all, was just as kind and loving and treated my sister and me as valued companions. He was and is the reason I know that men can be just as nurturing as women, and why I believe that though we have demonstrated to the satisfaction of the majority in this country that women can do what men can do, the next step is to demonstrate that men can do what women can do. For myself, I seem to have born a pantheist. I believed early, as many children do, that God was in all things, animate and otherwise. When I played solitaire, for instance, it was clear to me that I liked hearts the best. Therefore, I went out of my way to great lengths to treat all the suits equally, because I didn't want to hurt the club's feelings, because I liked them the least. Much later, as a teenager in a pretty violent Toledo neighborhood, I read the Bible and took 2 streetcars to get to what must have been the only fundamentalist Presbyterian church in town. And it was indeed very fundamentalist, and the people were very kind and very welcoming. It even had a neon sign and someone who played the saxophone for Jesus. I handed out fundamentalist Christian pamphlets at the Cherry Street Mission in Toledo, Ohio. The attraction for me was the kindness of my enormous muscle-bound yet amazingly gentle Sunday school teacher. He gave me the hope that I've found so many women have, that religion, and religion alone, is powerful enough to tame violent men. In my case, I needed to tame the boys in my neighborhood who made walking home from school such hell every day. But church or no, the boys kept taunting us. Wives in my neighborhood kept on getting beaten up on Saturday night, and some unknown grievance split the congregation in two. Besides, I realized that my Sunday school teacher, who owned a chicken farm, was not being gentle to his chickens. Despite living in India for a couple of years, no religious institution felt welcoming to me. They seemed to treat me, and girls and women in general, as if we were sinful, as if we were temptations to men, and certainly we were unsuitable for service at the altar. When I was in my mid-30s, I began to read about the politics of patriarchal religions, and I felt enormously relieved. Here was the reality of what I had experienced. Here was also the implication that it could be different. It didn't have to be that way. That godliness was present in women, in men, and in all living things. Only feminists allowed me to experience the joys of ritual by inviting me to a feminist Seder, of which Letty Pogerben, who's with us today, was a founder. I've gone almost every year for more than 20 years, and it has indeed introduced me to the joys and the importance of ritual. I've had many adventures as a feminist, including speaking at the, ironically, St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church in Minneapolis, thanks to Father Harvey Egan, a great supporter of social justice. And he and I survived 2 sermons that I gave on one day, being picketed roundly by cars surrounding the church and honking horns. And I was amazed to pick up the Times the following week and discover that in the great flurry of publicity about this, he happened to be an extremely popular priest, so they couldn't quite get rid of him. But nonetheless, the Pope announced that from now on, no one except church personnel, no layperson, could ever again give the homily. I never expected to have the Pope address. It was quite a shock to open the New York Times. But I still find that religion is not always, but too often, politics made sacred. A way of creating a God who looks suspiciously like the ruling class, who undermines our own internal authority with concepts of innate sinfulness and thereby substitutes an external authority. Giving over control of our lives to a religious authority may make it more likely that we will accept other systems of authority, as we see by the correlation of undemocratic governments to less democratic forms of any religion. Just as the hierarchical, patriarchal family trains us in a deep, deep way for hierarchies of race and class to come. I'm not singling out any religion, of course. As far as I can tell, each one has its own authoritarianism, its own reforms, as well as its remnants of pre-patriarchal spirituality, from Jewish mystics and Islamic Sufis to the cults of the Black Madonna. But monotheism in general has accompanied the withdrawal of the sacred from women and from nature, and the establishment of patriarchy, racism, and nationalism. Let me tell you 2 stories and give you a couple of other examples. I took a trip down the Nile, perhaps some of you have made this same wonderful journey, from the oldest, most Nubian parts of the Nile toward Cairo. What that means is that you see literally before your eyes, in this oldest continuous center of civilization, the representation in the most ancient carvings, buildings, and remnants of God as man, as woman, as every animal, as every flower and plant and bee and bird. God is literally in everything. Then you travel a little further and are perhaps 1,000 years from what you saw before, and you begin to notice that God is no longer as likely to be represented in nature, that the goddess has a son but no daughter. Then you travel still further, and perhaps another 1,000 years or so, and you see that the son has become very tall, taller than the goddess, and has become her consort rather than her son. And you continue in this way until, in the land of the pharaohs, the goddess becomes a throne on which the male god sits, and finally to mosques of modern day, where representations of humans, of women and men and nature are rarely, if ever, allowed. You can literally see, you can see the withdrawal of God from women and nature as a preface over a long term, several thousand years, to conquering women and nature. There is a wonderful Egyptologist named Henry Breasted, who worked in the late 1800s and early 1900s, who points out that monotheism is but imperialism in religion. Now let me tell you another story about religious architecture. I had a fellowship, how would men feel about having sisterships and Spinster of Arts degrees? I don't know, but anyway, I was glad to get the Mistress of Arts, when I was glad to get this fellowship at the Smithsonian. And there, with access to the Library of Congress, I went mad reading. And I found a book about religious architecture, religions of all kinds, on many continents. It was by a historian of religious architecture. And he, no feminist, nonetheless pointed out that by and large, patriarchal religious buildings are constructed to resemble the body of a woman. Since a major function of patriarchal religions is to control women's sexuality and to take onto themselves the decision of whether and when a woman can give birth, that is a physical power, but the mythic power, the symbolic power, is enormous of giving birth. And the most central ceremony which patriarchal religious structures are built to house is, one might argue, the symbolic birth giving, men taking over the symbolic power of giving birth. And so he pointed out there's very often, in a wide variety, not one religion he's talking about, but just in a wide variety of religious structures, an outer entrance, a vestibula, an inner entrance, labia majora, vestibula, it's the same word actually, labia minora, a vaginal aisle up the center, two curved ovarian structures on either side, the altar in the center, which represents the womb, where men give birth, often dressed in skirts. Where men say, essentially, you were born of woman, an inferior creature, therefore you were born in sin. But if you obey the rules of the patriarchy, you can be reborn through men. And we will sprinkle imitation birth fluid over your head, perhaps, and give you a new name, and you will be reborn through men. No wonder they don't want us at this altar. They've spent 5,000 years or so taking away our power of giving birth. Now, there are just a couple other small examples. There's so many I would like to share with you. But I recommend to you a book called Spare the Child, The Religious Roots of Child Abuse by Philip Greven, Greven. And he outlines the ways in which the more authoritarian parts of many religions, he's mainly talking about Christianity, describe children as having to be tamed, their spirits having to be broken, they have to be made obedient, almost like little animals having to be tamed. And he outlines this religious justification for what many of us would consider child abuse. And he goes on to explain, I don't know if I can do him justice briefly here, but he goes on to explain that convincingly that child abuse is the source of apocalyptic thinking in religion. That if you grow up as a small, helpless person, completely dependent on a large, powerful, raging adult who can destroy your world at a whim, and you have no recourse, then that way of thinking, that apocalyptic, everything can be gone in a moment way of thinking, stays with us and becomes reincorporated, reinscribed in religion. I think we have not even begun to slightly grasp how much methods of child rearing are related to forms of government, how dependent democracy is on some democracy in families, and how dependent authoritarian structures are on authoritarianism in families. And the same is true, I think, of the relationship between modes of child rearing that are described by religions and some parts of some religions, and that refuel and reinscribe as they go. And finally, I would just like to remind us that we now have the Fetal Protection Act, and I'm not here to lobby one way or the other, but I would just say that if we are for or against it, that's one thing, but we should not argue for it with the Bible, because the Old Testament makes very, very clear that fetal life is not equatable with a woman's life. And yet, there are religious arguments being made as we speak for that piece of legislation. Yes, I agree that the separation of church and state is one of our most precious and pragmatic principles, absolutely. As at this conference, we can try to persuade each other, but we cannot compel other than to adhere to democratically chosen principles in this diverse, multitudinous society. But I do believe that at the deepest level, both anthropologically and spiritually, we will never have a lived democracy, a deep democracy, until we pay females the honor of seeing God in them and relieve men of the impossible soul burden of being godlike. I don't believe we can treat children as possessions and still honor the uniqueness inside each one, that uniqueness which is the result of millennia of heredity and environment combined in a way that could never have happened before and could never happen again. I think anyone who's ever met a baby knows that there's already a person in that baby. And trouble arises when I think of it as flowers, when the child is a daisy or an iris and we try to make them into a lilac or a rose, we only end up with a very unhappy daisy or iris. The nature versus nurture conflict is as ridiculous and crazy as almost all the polarized notions that come basically anthropologically from the division of human nature into masculine and feminine. There are not two solutions to every problem or two sides to every question. There may be 14 or 101 or 7.5. But this false and cruel division of human nature has made us divide almost everything into two. I suggest that from now on, whenever we find ourselves dividing something into two, we stop and think, maybe it's not right. We, obviously, everyone in this room is the result of nature and nurture. And I believe we will go on destroying our environment until we restore the sacred to animals and to all living things. Just as every serial sadistic killer of whom we are aware started with sadism toward animals, our cruelty toward animals creates calluses that allows other kinds of cruelty to escalate. None of this is new. Indeed, it's very, very old. The last 5,000 to 8,000 years of patriarchy, racism, nationalism, and monotheism is in fact less than 5% of human history, only 5% of the time we have been on Earth. Indeed, with each new skeletal find and carbon dating, human history gets longer and longer. Sometimes I think we should just declare the last 5,000 to 8,000 years of patriarchy, racism, nationalism, and monotheism over. It was an experiment that failed. And this meeting is the first meeting of the post-patriarchal, post-racist, post-nationalist, post-monotheistic age. Why not? On every continent, there are remnants and renewals of ancient indigenous cultures from which we can learn. From the Kwai and San in Africa to the 500 nations that were on this supposedly empty continent before Europeans arrived. Maybe we should begin to think not about horizontal history sequentially, but vertical history. Who was standing on this ground? What cultures were on this ground to which we are so intimately connected right now? We're on it before the more patriarchal Europeans arrived. Not to romanticize the past, but to understand that if it has happened before, it can happen again. We have something to learn from. Some of these ancient religions survive even within the much more recent and almost new documents like the Bible. For example, the kingdom of God is within you. And of course, if we read the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, or the Gnostic Gospels themselves, we will find much more. Probably we need at least as much emphasis at Harvard and at every great university and college on inner space as this culture has put into outer space. Until then, we should look at the content, I believe, of social policy, regardless of its religious inspiration. Obviously, the Taliban's murder of women and gender apartheid is faith-based activism, just as is the caning of children here. Meanwhile, we can try to honor each other by listening with respect and an open heart, as you are listening to me now, and I deeply appreciate that, though I know that many of you find strength in other traditions, and many of the traditions I am naming, and as you have done with each other at this conference, and also by honoring, as well as each other, our whole selves. Women, I think, need to turn around the golden rule. It was written by a smart guy, for guys, I think. But women tend to need to treat ourselves as well as we treat others. As the 14th century Catholic nun, Juliana of Norwich, said, "I see no difference between God and our substance, and I see it as if we are all God. Thus I understood that God is our sensuality and shall never move away from it. We cannot be entirely holy until we know our own soul, our own sensuality." I think that means honoring today's version of my parents' mixed marriage, those between races and those of the same sex. Indeed, sometimes I think that men and women are the real mixed marriage. But as we both gain our full humanity, that will change too. Meanwhile, I say, speaking only for myself, that I find altars everywhere that women or men have put objects they love, people they empathize with, photographs of those they care about, rocks and shells, paintings, loved objects, whatever it is, those are altars. And I say to you from the bottom of my heart that you, the lives of the people in this room, are my Bible and my Talmud, my Upanishads and my Quran. Just as Alice Walker always says that she's writing what she should have been able to read, I think probably we are creating the religions we should have been able to have. So that in moments of celebration or sorrow, we no longer have to turn to ceremonies and rituals that denigrate us, that denigrate anyone, that are not open to everyone. When I was trying yesterday to decide what to say to you, I got on a crosstown bus in New York, sitting next to a woman in her 30s perhaps, maybe from the Philippines? I'm not sure. And she smiled at me, and I sat down, and we rode for a while. And finally, she put her hand on my hand, and she said, thank you for touching so many souls. I don't know, she never recognized me. She never said, I haven't a clue whether she was saying this because she knew who I was or not. Because then she said, that came through me. That, she said, and there were tears in her eyes. She said, that just came. And so I said, and does this happen? I thought, here's this woman who, she said, yes, it does. It did happen to her a lot. And she's a songwriter, and that's the way melodies come to her, and that's the way lyrics come to her, all in a rush like that, And we talked a little bit. She's doing a CD called Ascendance. We should all go right out and no, but I asked her, I said, can I buy it? She said, no, I haven't ascended to the sound room yet, to the recording room. And we got off the bus, and we didn't continue talking. It wasn't that we didn't want to or want to. It's just that we had had this incredible moment, and we walked apart. And I thought to myself, that is a consecrated spiritual moment. And I say to you that this is a consecrated spiritual moment. And let us take this power unto ourselves and into ourselves and spread it and remain open to it wherever we are. Thank you.
One of the goals of the conveners of this conference, the planning committee that worked with Swanee and Ann, was to make sure you all left hearing something new, and that throughout the 2 days, you would constantly be hearing new things. I think it was Elizabeth Cady Stanton who said that if it's been said before, it's not worth saying. And so the goal is to have a diversity of points of view, as you all know. And I appreciate this morning, as we began the morning, with the statement of how important it is to honor every point of view, which we have done a pretty good job of doing in this conference. I was sharing with one of the participants that as I find myself here with my sister June, my sister Swanee, and myself, we look very harmonious up here, and we're going to look even more harmonious as the afternoon and evening goes on. But the fact is, we hold very divergent views, and there have been years where we have not been able to discuss either politics or religion. There was so much tension around those topics, and we at times really, it caused us not even to speak to each other at certain periods. But what I think we're all doing in this conference is modeling how we can stay together with different points of view. And Gloria's going to take questions now. Gloria, there's 4 mics, I believe, here, and those of you with questions can begin to line up at the mics. And we ask that you state your name and where you're from, and make sure that you're asking a question of Gloria.
Answers. I could use some answers.
The policy here is that you state questions, but Gloria has just overridden that policy. So you do whatever you want at the mic, and it'll be her time. it'll be her time. But whatever you do, make it very brief, because there will be, we do want this to be very dialogic, but to honor the respect that's existed at the conference.
Do people on the top level? I'm worried about you up there. Do you have a mic?
Look right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
How about up there?
They'll
Okay, you can pass notes. You can drop notes. Organizing announcements also invited. Yeah, do you want, because I can't see in the light very well.
Hi,
Okay.
my name's Andrew. I'm from Boston, here in Boston, and I'm not quite sure whether you've commented on before, so if it's been said before, hopefully it's worth saying again. Could you comment a little bit on the Brooklyn Museum of Art exhibition and the controversy? And
No,
if-
I haven't commented on it. I'll be happy to comment on it because maybe it will work to the detriment of Giuliani, so. I think that whatever is in that exhibit, and I gather from people who have seen it that the dissected animals are far, far more disturbing than the Virgin Mary, who looks like an Urza. But anyway, regardless of what's in the exhibit, that more harm can be done by withdrawing money from it and punishing the museum, as Giuliani has been doing, so much so that they even closed the subway stops, 3 of the subway stops around the museum at the time of the opening. I think this is outrageous.
Right, yes. Yes, this gentleman in 5.
Okay.
Hi, Ms. Steinem. My name is Arnold Sito. I'm a first-year MPP. I want to thank you for coming and for coming in with your message of kindness and love that rings true in all religions, and which tends to unite people, as opposed to the politics of division and authority that you comment on. With that said, I'd like for you to comment on a recent sociological thesis by Francis Fukuyama, who suggests that there's a certain biological imperative which tends to generate patriarchal societies. Given this crowd, I'll qualify my statement in saying that these biological imperatives may be less in action at this time, but would you comment on his thesis that this is the reason why patriarchal societies have been more common than matriarchal societies in the past?
Well, it missed me. No, I think biological determinism, which sometimes suffragists used, tried to use in favor of women, but whether it's used for or against, I think it's really not right. And it also ignores that these patriarchal eras are A, only 5% of human history, and B, not uniform. There are, other kinds of cultures, even in the world now. So I think really we don't need to get into this, conflict, because I think that what's clear is that the individual difference, whatever the group differences may be, we can all discuss that, but what's clear is that the individual difference is greater than the group difference. And that's what we are trying to set free. And that's true of sex, it's true of race. It's the individual difference that is the greater.
There's Barbara right here, and then 2 people.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Lee, and a lot of people know me here as a social activist and a philanthropist, and when Gloria invited us to come up with organizing messages, I had to get up and do my grassroots spiel. So many of you know about the film on Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony that Ken Burns has just produced. It's going to be airing on public television on November 7th, which is a Sunday evening. And we have out in the other room where all the papers are, brochures about the film. And I've been working with General Motors and Ken and public television to make sure that this very important work about 2 of the great women leaders and their part in the movement against slavery and the movement for women's rights gets out to the American public. So find one of those papers. We're asking people all across the country to have small viewing parties at home and have your children or your husband or your friend or your mother come to watch this program with you. It's going to change your life. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, as you know, Elizabeth Cady Stanton undertook a little thing called rewriting the Bible.
Yes.
The women's Bible, yes.
Hi, I'm Bobby Francis. I'm chair of the ERA Summit, and I wanted to, Helen came up with an image I love, which is you're lifting this finely honed sword of your intellect, which every time I hear you, I recognize again. And the gentleman who used the word love, I think you combine those two just incredibly. So thank you very much yet again. But I want to ask you a version of a question I asked you last November in Summit, New Jersey, when you spoke there about the Equal Rights Amendment. It's kind of led into this with the history, the suffrage history and so on. But again, we work on some of these issues as real affirmations of the spirit. And to me, many of the, quote, women's issues we work on, we do in that vein. But I think particularly something that's so basic an affirmation of the individual as the Equal Rights Amendment is a very spiritual issue to me. And so I'm just interested in your comment on that and the continuing need for it.
Yeah, I would be nice if the Constitution applied equally, you know, to to women of all races, but it's still legal, as you know, to make a distinction based on sex when the same distinction would not be acceptable were it on national origin, religion, race, so on. And there are still a lot of laws out there at the state level and some at the federal level that you know, would be rendered unconstitutional and would be done so much more efficiently. Also, without an Equal Rights Amendment, if we don't, you know, we can go backward. Capricious legislatures can make these laws over again. So it is crucial. But do you have an announcement that you
Well, I have materials out if anyone's interested on the conference table, and as we had discussed, there's a strategy we're calling the three-state strategy, that if 3 more of the unratified states would ratify, at least there would be a legal test of whether or not we actually might not have to start all over again, and it could, in fact, enter the Constitution.
Because other amendments didn't have a ratification deadline, as you know, and so, you know, this is this whole question, but this is in the material, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
great.
thank you.
Okay, all right. Let's see. We're going up there next, I think. Yes.
Hi, my name is Komal. I'm a freshman at Harvard, but I'm originally from California. And I really enjoyed your speech. I would just like to hear you elaborate on one of the issues of the double standard that you alluded to earlier. And what I mean is we have women who work in the home and they're domestic engineers under the PC terminology, but if a man works at home, he's a lazy bum. And I'd just like to hear you speak about how we have organizations such as the Radcliffe Science Alliance to promote women in science, yet we don't have specific organizations that cater towards the needs of men, and how we can actually move towards a more equal society as opposed to a more segregated one.
Well, I think that what we're seeking is remedial action, you know, and we have to look at each situation. If we really need a organization, you know, devoted to the rights of men in a specific circumstance, we should have it. But we don't need White History Month, you know, and you know, so we may or may not, you know, actually need it. And I'm not convinced that a woman who works at home is a domestic engineer. She may be a lazy welfare mother, you know, because we have never succeeded in doing what we should have done and must still do, which is an attributed economic and social value to raising children, to work that's done in the home. On the contrary, the guy who's working at home, though I agree that he may be penalized by his peers, you know, in the office and so on, they may think this is very weird, is probably getting terminal gratitude from women, you know, so I think we ought to take it in everybody's case on, you know, on an individual situational basis to see what is necessary to remedy. Not just to say tit for tat, you know, if there's this, there has to be that, you know.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Millspaugh, and I'm a dual degree student between the Divinity School and the Kennedy School of Government. You've talked today about the interconnection between various forms of oppression. You've been mainly talking about feminism, although you've mentioned animals, and you've said that you would encourage us to invest our view of animals with divinity. And I would like to ask you to elaborate on your views of animals and whether you would encourage feminists to become vegetarians.
I think I wasn't just talking about animals, I'm talking about all human beings, you know. I mean, I would, you know, worry about race and class and sexuality, all kinds of things, you know, first, rightly or wrongly. But I do think, and I don't think that the kind of society we're seeking necessarily demands vegetarianism. For instance, I'm a vegetarian, but the 500 native nations on this continent were not vegetarian, but what they did do was to kill only what they needed for food and for fur, to honor the spirit of the animal, to kill humanely, to, you know, it was a very, very, very different. So, you know, I just think that the idea that animal life has, you know, no value, or that animals have no nervous system, or, you know, the politics of cruelty can often begin there.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Kalish, and I'm over here, and I'm a mid-career student here at Harvard. And I'm wondering what you think of where we are today with the women's movement, if you could sort of look back 30 years ago when you started this. Betty Friedan has suggested in an article called Second Stage that things aren't quite where they could be or where you hoped they would be. So where do you think we are
Just a little question like that?
You're at Harvard, don't forget.
I think that's, you know, I don't want to seize the power to define, because I think the women's movement is wherever it is in the lives of the people who are listening, the people in this room. So with that qualification, I will try to take a more historical view and say that if it took us between 100 and 150 years, depending on how you count, to gain a legal identity as human beings for men of color and women of all races in this country, in the abolitionist and suffragist movements, having gained that legal identity, now we're seeking legal and social equality. So we shouldn't be surprised it's going to take a century, something like that. We're only about 30 years into it. I don't know how to break it to you, but I think we have about 70 years left of this. And probably there will be other waves, you know, before we finally have societies in which people are treated as unique individuals, and the single factor of race or sex, class, you know, don't determine our whole human futures. In this wave, I think we have passed through a consciousness-raising, national, big, populist consciousness-raising stage, although when each new issue comes up, it has to happen over again. But now there is a majority support in public opinion polls for all the basic issues of equality. And we've moved into what is actually a more difficult stage, which is institutional change. And we still need more consciousness raising. I mean, we talk about equal pay. What about redefining what work is? You know, we talk about women having 2 jobs. How about men? You know, children need, you know, to have men raising them too, so they know that men can be as loving and nurturing as, you know, there are all these ways I think we can see where we are. It's sort of as if there's a barrier and we keep pushing it, so there's more cleared territory back here, but there's still a barrier. So it used to be when you went to get a job, they said, no, we don't hire women, you know. Okay, now the barriers move to maybe 12 or 15 years out when you hit the glass ceiling or the sticky floor of the pink-collar ghetto, you know, where most women are still employed. So in all, you know, you can measure it in lots of ways, but I think.
So you're pleased?
No, I'm
Proud.
mad as hell.
You're mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm trying to take an aerial view. But I would say in general, I'm enormously pleased when I spend most of my life, or about half of my life, I guess, traveling. And that's what keeps me sane, because I don't have to believe what I see in the media all the time. So, you know, I see what women and many men too are doing in communities and all this energy, and, you know, I feel good when I look laterally. I don't feel so good when I look up, because we have a very imperfect democracy, to put it mildly. You know, these majorities are not reflected in our public policy.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Dory Clark, and first of all, I want to let you know I'm a Smithy. But second of all, my most recent incarnation is I just graduated from the Divinity School here at Harvard. When I entered in the fall of '97, The Christian Coalition was exceedingly powerful. The Promise Keepers had just had their massive rally in Washington, Stand in the Gap. And now that I've graduated 2 years later, the entire landscape seems to have changed. The Promise Keepers have had huge staff layoffs. The Christian Coalition has gotten its 501c3 status denied. And I was wondering what your view was of the continuing threat of the religious right, whether they're a slumbering giant or whether there's been some sort of sea change, what your thoughts were. Thank you.
Well, I actually, I think there are women here from the religious right who can answer this question better than I can. So I will address my part of it, which is that our job, the religious right has every right, I couldn't think of another, to turn out its vote and to be active citizens and so on, short of, violence against abortion clinics or something, which is clearly illegal, but, within all the legal parameters, absolutely. The problem is that we're not doing our job. Those organizations, if you want to call, say, the Christian Coalition or the National Rifle Association, or, you can say they turn out 90% of their membership to vote. The rest of the population turns out somewhere, depending on the election, between 20 and 50%. So I think that we need to attend to our own responsibilities.
My name is Bernadette Bruton. I teach I'm over here. Mm-hmm. Yes, hello. I teach at Brandeis University and am currently at the Harvard Law School. Over the last 3 decades, feminist, womanist, and mujerista theologians and scholars of religion have analyzed texts, have assessed the situation of women within monotheistic and polytheistic religious traditions, and have both critiqued monotheism and have also found that there's much to critique in polytheism, and have worked to create or to build upon progressive traditions within monotheism. And in your presentation, you distinguished sharply monotheism from, you didn't say polytheism, but from some other forms of religious practice. But many scholars, including many in this room, have worked to help to create a more differentiated historical picture of such traditions and to reinvigorate monotheism. Could you respond to all of this feminist, womanist, and mujerista scholarship?
I support it all. I mean, I think, that some people are transforming and reforming and changing from within, and some people are, trying to start different kinds of institutions outside, and we need both. Once again, it's not either or. I didn't address polytheism because I was trying to address it historically, not in the present. The present form of polytheism is different from the God represented as all living things, that I was trying to address historically. But I support it, absolutely, and I figure my job is to make you look reasonable.
Can you say ways in which it has shaped your thinking? Has it shaped your thinking, this research?
I enjoy reading it, but my position is sort of more, I love to see women doing sports. I don't do sports. I love to see people, on the WNBA, I'm there cheering. I love to see people arguing with the Bible and figuring out, what the original cuneiform, said, and so on. I love to see all that, but it's not where I am, but I support it.
Hi, my name is Chris.
I don't know. Yeah? Okay.
Sorry, is it my turn? My name is Christina Lewis. I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. And an issue that I've been grappling with personally just is the idea of having it all and balancing your career with your desire and the time that you're going to spend in making a home and having a family. And I was wondering on your own personal take on that issue and why you made the decisions that you did and how.
Well, I don't think we can answer the how can I combine career and family question until men are asking it as much as women are asking it. so what worries me is that women are encouraged to, and sometimes ourselves fall victim to, dealing with this question in a sealed bottle. Running around, so how can I do it all? How can I do it? Wait a minute, you don't have to do it all. Nobody can do it all, It's impossible to do it all. It's impossible to balance home and family until corporations and the workplace in general have changed work patterns easily available to the parents of young children, fathers and mothers. It's impossible as long as we're the only industrial society without a national system of childcare, of health. You know all these things. I don't have to say all this to you. So I would just say, don't get depressed, get mad. Say, you have a right and a real possibility, and many sisters and brothers and colleagues in making changes so that parents can really can really be parents, fathers as well. There are a lot of fathers who want to be real parents and who are restricted and ridiculed and so on. And it's, in the meantime, is it easy? No, it isn't easy. But I think the most pernicious thing is when we somehow think it's our fault, our job. Only we have to figure this out.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So here.
My name is Miranda Richmond. I'm a freshman at Harvard. And as a young woman, I'd first like to say it's so empowering to see all of these women who are here sort of pulling us all forward. It's great, very inspiring.
Well, imagine how we feel seeing you.
As a young woman, though, I'm seeing in my generation a sort of complacency that's growing up as sort of the big barriers have started to be knocked down. And we all have sort of sat back and said, oh, well, glass ceiling, we'll worry about that when we come to it. And I think that we are forgetting the sort of latent problems that still exist in the relationship between male and female. And I was wondering what you think the women's movement versus the individual woman and man, how we can relate to that, because a lot of times it is just sort of on an individual basis, and I think the role of the women's movement as a whole has kind of changed, and I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, I agree with you in a way that if young women have a problem, it's only that they think there's no problem, but that's okay, because the important thing is you have dreams and ideas and things you're going to do. We had our dreams curtailed, even. Your minds are much more free. So when you get out there and you run into a barrier, you're going to get very pissed, and that's great. That's wonderful. And this kind of pattern is why, the need to be in it before you see what's wrong, which is, of course, was true of all of us, me too, is why it is that women are the one group that gets more radical as they get older, because if we're going to be conservative, which I shouldn't use as a word, but if we're going to be, by that I mean about women, about our own role, it's more likely to happen when we're young because we assume that everything is okay. But we just want you to know that there's help out there, that we know that you're going to invent things we never thought of, but we're glad to supply whatever we can so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And as for the movement's relationship to individual women and men, I think women and men should all be part of it. Like, I should be an anti-racist, I should be part of organization because I'm culturally deprived. Hello, do I want to be in a society where you go snowblind, because you can't, doesn't look anything like the world? No. So, I think we can all be a part of it and all realize that the littlest thing we do has an impact.
Thank you.
My name is Judy Berman, and I'm with the Center for Effective Public Policy in Washington, and we're working with the National Advisory Council on Violence Against Women to produce an agenda for the nation on violence against women. It's kind of a where have we been, where are we now, where are we going sort of document that we're working on. And one of the things that's sort of obvious to us in our research is that where we started was as a political movement, and where we've come to is really much more of a service movement. And part of that has been about institutional change, which is good, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to recuperate the political aspects of it and sort of return it to a political movement, which seems to be what we need to really move it forward into the next stage, the involvement of men and women allies and things like that.
No, that's a very interesting question. I think the service aspect obviously is crucial, but as soon as we try to get more funding or better facilities or more understanding or a better court system or any number of things, we immediately become political over again. So I think some of this just happens naturally. I think the new conceptual thinking and leaps forward that we need come from understanding its linkage and keeping it from being compartmentalized. And so I find myself rethinking terms like domestic violence because it makes it sound trivialized. I've started to say original violence because the violence in the home is the source of most violence in society, whether you look at violent criminals or whether you look at violence in the streets, or it's where the cycle of violence begins. So I think that we can make that leap, and we can attach it as it should be attached to criminology courses, to government courses. I hope it's not true here at the Kennedy School, but so far no place that I've been that studies forms of government attaches automatically forms of child rearing that produce those forms of government. It's perfectly clear that changes in child rearing were as responsible for the possibility of change in the former Soviet Union as anything economic, and certainly more than Reagan saying it was an evil empire. So I mean, we can see the connections, see the seamless web, and start mainstreaming in a good way. That is, making the consequences clear. It should be a top. If we could raise a generation of kids in this country who were not abused and whose spirits were not broken, we would have a what would it be like? What would it be like? No. And while we're thinking, and think about all of our kids who are in jail. Angela Davis has this phrase, which I'm sure you've heard, which is the prison industrial complex, which is absolutely what it is, because the profiteering that went forward and still goes forward on the arms race has to some extent now transferred itself to the building of unnecessary prisons. The crime rate is going down, prison building is going up. Who's in those prisons we know, it's the conceptual leap. Does that make sense? And then the policy, the social policy, and the political activism that follows. Can we just, since people are standing, can we finish who's standing?
Very briefly.
Okay.
You asked us to enrich you with something from the conference, and
I forgot about that. How come you haven't been?
One of the Jewish women in my panel group said, "Be kind to strangers, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The reason that comes to my heart right now is I think that in the conversation we risk demonizing or caricaturing the religious right. I can hear you trying to resist that in your responses, but I think if we have any hope of continuing to be in dialogue as a group, we have to resist that together. So I just want to say as a member of the group that I want to speak against that.
Okay, what group are you a member of? Are you speaking?
I'm probably a member of the Democratic Christian left. But I'd rather not be a member of a group, and I'd rather just get to know the people here.
Of this group, I see. No, I'm just asking because, never mind. But I mean, I think how it's at women's conferences, it's those of us who can pay the entry fee that start to worry about the entry fee. It's those of us who don't have kids who start to worry about childcare. It's so interesting. So I was just wondering from where you were speaking. Yeah.
I think there's someone after.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Katie Barrett. I'm a freshman here at Harvard, and I was wondering, what's your opinion of the different men's movements that have come into being over the past 20 years or so? Like, for example, Robert Bly in the early 90s and all the similar movements.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you can sort of look at the movements themselves, just like you can look at any other group and figure out what's going on. So there are lots of excellent and courageous men's groups. Enough? No, but the Oakland Men's Project, for instance, which views its work as ending male violence, not only against women, but against other men. They address the fact that men are afraid of other men, and they meet together in a multiracial group, gay men and straight men together. Robert Bly, in the overall scope of things, it's probably positive, but I worry that it's all middle-class white guys out there. They don't seem to be gay and straight together or very multiracial, and they're beating drums. I thought that seems a little atavistic to me. But, maybe. I think that what's most hopeful to me is when, just as an observer, is when men's groups come together and don't talk about what should we be doing for them. It's like being a white liberal, let me help you. But start to talk about how they missed their fathers, what kinds of fathers they wish they had, and becoming the fathers they wish they had, and begin to see their stake in it and really become organic allies. Is there, okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Hagan, and I'm a sophomore here at the college, and I just wanted to say that this has been so exciting to hear you speak. I was reading your introduction of To Be Real, and I really loved what you said about the fact that, you put forth all these kind of different stereotypes of feminists, and then who's the feminist, and they all are. Something I find really frustrating among women my age is that they still seem to feel so kind of, if you'll ask, well, would you consider yourself a feminist? And they'll say, no, I'm not a feminist. And I don't know if it's that they think that would be threatening to men or exactly what it was. Mm-hmm. But, what about the thought of considering yourself a humanist as opposed to a feminist? And personally, I would probably say I was more of a feminist, but, has that ever come up in...
Yeah, well, of course, this happens at all ages. You shouldn't think that it's only happening among young women. And I don't know how to break this to you, but to say you're a humanist can get you in deep shit. I once went to speak at some place in Texas, and there were all these demonstrators out there with big signs saying Gloria Steinem is a humanist. I thought, oh, my friends are there. No. But remember that that I think there are two problems with the word feminist. One is people don't know what it means, and if you send them to the dictionary and see it means a person who believes the full social, economic, political, equality of women and men, people say yes, I'm a feminist. The second is they do know what it means. So we have to accept the fact that it is, as we always used to say, a revolution, not a public relations movement. That you are going to get opposition. Having said that, however, I think that it comes at us sometimes as if everybody didn't call themselves a feminist, something was wrong. Well, everybody doesn't call themselves anything, And the truth of the matter is that as many or more women self-identify as feminists, the pollsters don't have the wit to ask men yet, but anyway, self-identify as feminists as self-identify as Republicans. And, being a feminist is more respected than being a lawyer. So the question is, compared to what? Compared to what? And there are also other wonderful words. Womanist is a great word. Women's liberationist is a great word. There are all kinds of great words. But I think that sort of deep down, especially maybe among young women, that it's, you tell me if this is right or not, but it's okay to say, you want something for yourself, but if you say you're a feminist, you're saying you're identifying with other women, you know, and saying that that's, and it has a sexual implication, you know, does this mean you're a lesbian? Why not, you know, but it's the fear of conflict. And I think that only once you realize that you have to send out a signal to get support, that if you hide it, you'll only get in more conflict, you know, really, because you'll be treated in a way that you don't wish to be treated, which would happen anyway, but now you don't have the support because you didn't, you know, gather people around you.
Oh, and also, how does it feel to be compared to Joan of Arc on a daily basis? Did you ever get used to that?
You want to hear my revisionist Joan, or do we have time? No, we don't have time. Okay, well, I'll make it very fast. And I have no idea whether this is true, all right? I consign the historians here to figure out whether this is true. That she was, of course, a leader of the peasantry, which was largely pagan still, the ancient indigenous religion. And the Dauphin and the royalty were Christians. There had been a long series of wars which had decimated the population, and so the peasantry was no longer so eager to sign up or volunteer for the army. So according to this theory, they needed someone, the royalty needed someone who was a leader of the old tradition, someone the peasantry would follow. And so she became that leader, sincerely became that leader, but was also the first person who led in the name of her own pagan religion against the peasantry and for the upper class and royalty who were regarded by the peasantry as not their best friends, you know. And then after she won, she had too much power, so they had to get rid of her. They had to burn her. That's the revisionist theory. Who knows?
We know Gloria would never abdicate her commitment to the grassroots. So at that point, the analogy breaks down. So last question.
Hi, my name is Therese Long, and I'm a first-year student in the public policy program at the Kennedy School. And 2 weeks ago, Susan Faludi was on campus, and a bunch of me and my feminist friends went to go see her. And I was anticipating a real righteous speech from Susan Faludi. I read her book, Backlash, loved it. Stift addressed a different theme of how in the past 20 or 30 years, men's role in society has caused them to become frustrated with what's going on, tumultuous changes, social, industrial, employment changes. And I wanted to know if you could address that, as well as the criticism she's received. Some people have called her an anti-feminist. Some people have said, yay, we welcome the collaboration. So I wanted to hear your views on it.
Mm-hmm. Who's called her an anti-feminist? That's so odd.
People actually, I've read articles in Ms., actually the last issue of Ms., that have said that.
No, but nobody called her an anti-feminist, did they? No, I don't think so. I mean, people may or may not think that...
I mean, feminists have called her anti-feminist because they think she's addressing...
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm a great fan of Susan Faludi. I think that she is an excellent journalist and a good, incisive mind. And that it's very important that she has come out with this book at this time, because there are a little wavelet of books coming too that blame feminism for the demasculinization of men. And I think that the attention and the massive research of her book will go a long way to make it a much more realistic dialogue. If you're, are you addressing her speech, maybe, that she was not as dynamic as... Look, Susan Faludi, I relate to Susan Faludi. I also did not speak in public until I was in my mid-30s. I was terrified to speak in public. I say this in case people here don't like it, so if I can do it, anybody can do it. But she had not spoken in public ever until she published Backlash and found herself having to go out to speak. And then wrote a lovely little essay about finding your voice. But I think that she's still much more comfortable being a writer than being a speaker. So I don't know, I wasn't present, but I think that her book is helpful and useful. I suspect it won't hit the same chord that Backlash did, because women readers who buy most books anyway may not want to read about men as victims, do you know what I mean? And men, there may not be enough men who want to read this book, but it's a very, very important book. Right, that's it, right? Okay, now wait a minute. Do you all know each other? I always do that. It's at the end. It's an organizer's thing. I'm always worried that there are people who, if you don't, most of you who've been at the conference and have these things probably do. But there are folks up there who maybe don't. So just as you're walking out, see if there are 2 or 3 people you don't know. Introduce yourselves. Say what you're caring about doing. See if you can't leave here with a new revolutionary colleague or something. A new subversive organizing tactic. Who knows? Thank you.
And no one's in danger of leaving without new ideas. So, Gloria, I want to thank you for your remarks. And yes.
I'm a graduate of Harvard. I went here a few decades ago. My profession was negotiating with the French government. And I have a question I'd like to ask, which is, do you feel there's any difference between the way Anglo-Saxons and Latin countries deal with women?
I see. Is this a question for Gloria?
Yes.
Gloria, can you answer that question in like 3 or 4 words?
You didn't hear it, but is there any difference in the way Anglo-Saxon and Latin countries deal with women? Yes, but you have to be on LSD to see it.
All right. We're really thrilled about Gloria being here. We have a couple announcements before people leave. So if you can slow down.
Conference people, stay. If any of the students are leaving, would you do so without any noise, please?
I want to say, Gloria, that I appreciate your answer to Bernadette Bouton's question, which I thought was an excellent question, about the people who are putting painstaking care into helping to reveal the original impulse of some of these religions that have been so skewed because of the patriarchy. And your response was one of honoring those people who choose to do that, and I'm one of those, and asking for honor back for you, which reminds me of Kathleen Sands, the way you talked this morning about, the goal here is to be, if not on common ground, at least on level ground, where we're all speaking our truths. And so thank you for being here, but thank you especially for you and all you've done, and for living the revolution. Because whatever you may think about Gloria's remarks, had it not been for Gloria and her colleagues, Letty, and the movement that she and others created, I don't know that any of us would have gotten on our respective planes with our briefcases and come here for this conference to debate these topics. And she has meant so much to our culture that Swanee and I were trying to figure out how to thank her, and there weren't any words. The Div School came to Swanee, June, and I and asked if we would sing a closing of this conference that's going to be a segue into the next conference. So we have agreed to do that, but it reminded Swanee and me of the first time we ever met Gloria. We had heard of her, this was about, I think it was about 16 years ago. And we had the opportunity to meet her, and so we went to her office. And we sang a song. We knew she met so many thousands of other people. How would she remember us? So we sang her a song, which we think you were politely appalled to, she just sort of, these little white knuckles at first, but then she relaxed. She said, oh, this is really intriguing. So we wanted to resurrect that moment but June is going to join us. And again, June, Swanee, and I embody for you all unity within diversity that we are at this conference. And I think that's your Gloria. Right? That's really okay. Gloria, you have set the pace. Gloria, thank you for your words of grace.
Now, I have to say a couple more things. Now, I know Helen's been saying this too, but I want to say something. We have spoken with great candor throughout these last 2 days. I want to say something because I watch body language. And I watched Gloria as you were speaking, and there were a lot of people who were sitting up straighter and straighter and straighter and straighter as you were going. And there were some people who were really wilting. Okay? Because that is very, very hard for people to sit in here and hear images and traditions that are very precious to them and who are building their lives around that work and hear it, so differently approached. And especially in the Q&A, and with all respect to the student who asked, because he wasn't part of this gathering here. I mean, if you can imagine someone standing up and asking about the threat of lesbianism or the threat of Jews, advancing in our societies, I mean, that just feels horrible. Horrible. And it is so stifling to the kind of spirit that we've tried to nurture here. So I want to say a special thank you to those of you who have spent, decades trying to do damage control that, you considered coming from Gloria Steinem, because it's really important that you've been able to be here and treat her with the same respect that you would like to be treated with, okay? And I want to say that especially to June. When I introduced June to Gloria in January, Helen's daughter was getting married, and I did it by saying, oh, Gloria, this is June, the Gloria Steinem of the religious right. And their jaws just dropped, both of them. Let me mention a couple of other things. Special thanks to Victoria Budson and Andrea Olson, Ballard Dillon, Meredith Pierce, Farrah Short, Colleen Richards-Powell, and Andy Friedman, who've done a spectacular job of organizing here. Now, what is happening is we are walking over to dinner at the Divinity School, and then afterwards at the Ecumenical Chapel for Words and Music of Faith and Action. That is happening at 8, the dinner's at 7, and then the time in the Ecumenical Chapel is at 8, not at 9 o'clock as it says in the program. Your name tag is your ticket. We can probably get you in if you don't have it. At the main entrance, there are going to be yellow signs that our volunteers have to lead you over. It takes about 25 minutes. If it's difficult for you to walk that distance, there's a green van down there that will ferry you. If you want to, you can just wander over on your own. You have maps in your notebooks. And now to cross the continuum from Gloria's provocative remarks to a tune from our own Southern Baptist roots. The original lyrics were, I am not worthy. For obvious reasons, we have changed the lyrics. Okay. Okay. Now is the time for a rare opportunity to gather your jackets and go across Harvard Square to the School of Divinity, where dinner and coffee will flow. Come to the Div School, our voices repeated. Come to the Div School,
our hearts gladly beat it. Now we're connecting our lives at the core.